Chapter 1 of the Deerslayer. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recording by Josh Smith. The Deerslayer by James Fenimore Cooper. Chapter 1. There's a pleasure in the pathless woods. There's a rapture on the lonely shore. There's society where none intrudes. By the deep sea and music in its roar, I love not man the less, but nature more. For these are interviews in which I steal from all I may be or have been before, to mingle with the universe and feel what I can never express yet cannot all conceal. Childe Harold. On the human imagination, events produce the effects of time. Thus, he who has traveled far and has seen much is apt to fancy that he has lived long, and the history that most abounds in important incidents soonest assumes the aspect of antiquity. In no other way can we account for the venerable air that is already gathering around American annals. When the mind reverts to the earliest days of colonial history, the period seems remote and obscure, the thousand changes that thicken along the links of recollections, throwing back the origin of the nation to a day so distant as seemingly to reach the mists of time. And yet 4 lives of ordinary duration would suffice to transmit, from mouth to mouth in the form of tradition, all that civilized man has achieved within the limits of the Republic. Although New York alone possesses a population materially exceeding that of either the 4 smallest kingdoms of Europe, or materially exceeding that of the entire Swiss Confederation, it is little more than 2 centuries since the Dutch commenced their settlement, rescuing the region from the savage state. Thus, what seems venerable by accumulation of changes is reduced to familiarity when we come seriously to consider it solely in connection with time. This glance into the perspective of the past will prepare the reader to look at the pictures we are about to sketch with less surprise than he might otherwise feel, and a few additional explanations may carry him back in imagination to the precise condition of society that we desire to delineate. It is a matter of history that the settlements on the eastern shores of the Hudson, such as the Claverack, Kinderhook, and even Poughkeepsie, were not regarded as safe from Indian incursions a century since, and there is still standing on the banks of the same river and within musket shot of the wars of Albany, a residence of a younger branch of the Van Rensselaers that has loopholes constructed for defense against the same crafty enemy. Although it dates from a period scarcely so distant, other similar memorials of the infancy of the country are to be found, scattered through what is now deemed the very center of American civilization, affording the plainest proofs that all we possess of security from invasion and hostile violence is the growth of but little more than the time that it is frequently fulfilled by a single human life. The incidents of this tale occurred between the years 1740 and 1745, when the settled portions of the colony of New York were confined to the 4 Atlantic counties, a narrow belt of country on each side of the Hudson, extending from its mouth to the falls near its head, and to a few advanced neighborhoods on the Mohawk and the Schoharie. Broad belts of the virgin wilderness not only reached the shores of the first river, but they even crossed it, stretching away into New England, and affording forced covers to the noiseless moccasin of the native warrior as he trod the secret and bloody warpath. A bird's-eye view of the whole region east of the Mississippi must then have offered one vast expanse of woods, relieved by a comparatively narrow fringe of cultivation along the sea, dotted by the glittering surfaces of lakes, and intersected by the waving lines of river. In such a vast picture of solemn solitude, the district of country we design to paint sinks into insignificance, though we feel encouraged to proceed by the conviction that, with slight and immaterial distinctions, he who succeeds in giving an accurate idea of any portion of this wild region must necessarily convey a tolerably correct notion of the whole. Whatever may be the changes produced by man, the eternal round of the seasons is unbroken. Summer and winter, seedtime and harvest, return in their stated order with sublime precision, affording to man one of the noblest of all the occasions he enjoys of proving the high powers of his far-reaching mind, encompassing the laws that control their exact uniformity, and in calculating their never-ending revolutions. Centuries of summer suns had warmed the tops of the same noble oaks and pines, sending their heats even to the tenacious roots. When voices were heard calling to each other in the depths of a forest of which the leafy surface lay bathed in the brilliant light of a cloudless day in June, while the trunks of the trees rose in a gloomy grandeur in the shades beneath. The calls were in different tones, evidently proceeding from two men who had lost their way, and were searching in different directions for their path. At length a shout proclaimed success, and presently a man of gigantic mold broke out of the tangled labyrinth of a small swamp, emerging into an opening that appeared to have been formed partly by the ravages of the wind and partly by those of fire. This little area, which afforded a good view of the sky, although it was pretty well filled with dead trees, lay on the side of one of the high hills, or low mountains, into which nearly the whole surface of the adjacent country was broken. "Here is room to breathe in," exclaimed the liberated forester, as soon as he found himself under a clear sky, shaking his huge frame like a mastiff that has just escaped from a snowbank. "Hurrah, Deerslayer! Here is daylight, at last, and yonder is the lake." These words were scarcely uttered when the second forester dashed aside the bushes of the swamp and appeared in the area. After making a hurried adjustment of his arms and disordered dress, he joined his companion, who had already begun his disposition for a halt. "Do you know this spot?" demanded the one called Deerslayer, "or do you shout at the sight of the sun?" "Both, lad, both. I know the spot, and I'm not sorry to see so useful a friend as the sun. Now we have got the points of the compass in our minds once more, and 'twill be our own fault if we let anything turn them topsy-turvy again, as just happened. My name is not Hurry Harry, if this be not the very spot where the land hunters camped the last summer, and passed a week. See, yonder are the dead bushes of their bower, and here is the spring. Much as I like the sun, boy, I have no occasion for it to tell me it is noon. This stomach of mine is as good a timepiece as to be found in the colony, and it already points to 12:30. So open the wallet, and let us wind up for another 6 hours' run." At this suggestion, both set themselves about making the preparations necessary for their usual frugal but hearty meal. We will profit by this pause in the discourse to give the reader some idea of the appearance of the men, each of whom is destined to enact no insignificant part in our legend. It would not have been easy to find a more noble specimen of vigorous manhood than was offered in the person of him who called himself Hurry Harry. His real name was Henry March, but the frontiersman, having caught the practice of giving sobriquets from the Indians, the appellation of Hurry was far oftener applied to him than his proper designation, and not unfrequently he was termed Hurry Scurry, a nickname he had obtained from a dashing, reckless, off-handed manner, and of physical restlessness that kept him so constantly on the move, as to cause him to be known along the whole line of scattered habitations that lay between the province and the Canadas. The stature of Hurry Harry exceeded 6 feet 4, and being unusually well proportioned, his strength fully realized the idea created by his gigantic frame. The face did no discredit to the rest of the man, for it was both good-humored and handsome. His air was free, and though his manners necessarily partook of the rudeness of a border life, the grandeur that pervaded so noble a physique prevented it from becoming altogether vulgar. Deerslayer, as Hurry called his companion, was a very different person in appearance, as well as in character. In stature he stood about 6 feet in his moccasins, but his frame was comparatively light and slender, showing muscles, however, that promised unusual agility, if not unusual strength. His face would have had little to recommend it except youth, were it not for an expression that seldom failed to win upon those who had leisure to examine it, and to yield to the feeling of confidence it created. This expression was simply that of guileless truth, sustained by an earnestness of purpose and a sincerity of feeling that rendered it remarkable. At times this air of integrity seemed to be so simple as to awaken the suspicion of a want of the usual means to discriminate between artifice and truth. But few came in serious contact with the man without losing his distrust and respect for his opinions and motives. Both these frontiersmen were still young, Hurry having reached the age of 6 or 8 and 20, while Deerslayer was several years his junior. Their attire needs no particular description, though it may be well to add that it was composed in no small degree of dressed deerskins, and had the usual signs of belonging to those who passed their time between the skirts of civilized society and the boundless forest. There was, notwithstanding, some attention to the smartness and picturesque in the arrangements of Deerslayer's dress, more particularly in the part connected with his arms and accoutrements. His rifle was in perfect condition. The handle of his hunting knife was neatly carved. His powder horn was ornamented with suitable devices lightly cut into the material, and the shot pouch was decorated with wampum. On the other hand, Hurry Harry, either from constitutional recklessness or from a secret consciousness how little his appearance required artificial aids, wore everything in a careless, slovenly manner, as if he felt a noble scorn for the trifling accessories of dress and ornaments. Perhaps a peculiar effect on his fine form and great stature was increased rather than lessened by this unstudied and disdainful air of indifference. "Come, Deerslayer, fall to, and prove that you have a Delaware stomach as you say you have had a Delaware education," cried Hurry, setting the example by opening his mouth to receive a slice of cold venison steak that would have made an entire meal for a European peasant. "Fall to, lad, and prove your manhood on this poor devil of a doe with your teeth, as you have already done with your rifle." "Nay, nay, Hurry, there's little manhood in killing a doe, and that too out of season, though there might be some in bringing down a painter or a catamount," returned the other, disposing himself to comply. "The Delawares had given me my name, not so much on account of a bold heart as on account of a quick eye and an active foot. There may not have been a cowardice in overcoming a deer, but sartain there is no great valor." "The Delawares themselves are no heroes," muttered Hurry through his teeth, the mouth being too full to permit it to be fairly opened, "or they never would have allowed them loping vagabonds, the Mingos, to make them women." "That matter is not rightly understood, has never been rightly explained," said the Deerslayer earnestly, for he was as zealous a friend as his companion was dangerous as an enemy. "The Mengwe fill the woods with their lies and misconstruct words and treaties. I have now lived 10 years with the Delawares, and I know them to be as manful as any other nation when the proper time to strike comes. Harkee, Master Deerslayer, since we are on the subject, we may as well open our minds to each other in a man-to-man way. Answer me one question. You have had so much luck among the game as to have gotten the title, it would seem, but did you ever hit anything human or intelligible? Did you ever pull the trigger on an enemy that was capable of pulling one upon you?" This question produced a singular collision between mortification and correct feeling in the bosom of the youth that was easily to be traced in the workings of his ingenuous countenance. The struggle was short, however, uprightness of heart soon getting the better of false pride and frontier boastfulness. "To own the truth, I never did," answered Deerslayer, "seeing that a fitting occasion never offered. The Delawares have been peaceable since my sojourn with them, and I hold it to be unlawful to take the life of a man except in open and generous warfare." "What? Did you never find a fellow thieving among your traps and skins, and do the law on him with your own hands, by way of saving the magistrates trouble in the settlements, and the rogue himself the cost of the suit?" "I am no trapper, Hurry," returned the young man proudly. "I live by the rifle, a weapon at which I will not turn my back on any man of my years between the Hudson and the St. Lawrence. I never offer a skin that has not a hole in its head besides them which nature made to see with or to breathe through." Ay, this is all very well, in the animal way, though it makes but a poor figure alongside of scalps and ambushes. Shooting an Indian from an ambush is acting up to his own principles, and now we have what you call lawful war on our hands. The sooner you wipe that disgrace off your character, the sounder will be your sleep, if it only come from knowing that there is one enemy the less prowling in the woods. I shall not frequent your society long, friend Natty, unless you look higher than four-footed beasts to practice your rifle on. Our journey is nearly ended, you say, Master March, and we can part tonight if you see occasion. I have a friend waiting for me who will think it no disgrace to consort with a fellow creature that has never yet slain his kind. I wish I knew what has brought that skulking Delaware into this part of the country so early in the season, muttered Hurry to himself, in a way to show equally distrust and recklessness of its betrayal. Where did you say the young chief was to give you the meeting? At a small round rock near the foot of the lake, where they tell me the tribes are given to resorting to making their treaties, and to bury their hatchets. This rock I have often heard the Delawares mention, though lake and rock are equally strangers to me. The country is claimed by both Mingoes and Mohicans, and is sort of common territory to fish and hunt through. In time of peace, though, what it may become in wartime, the Lord only knows. Common territory? Exclaimed Hurry, laughing aloud. I should like to know what Floating Tom Hutter would say to that. He claims a lake as his own property, in virtue of 15 years' possession, and will not likely to give it up to either Mingo or Delaware without a battle for it. And what will the colonies say to such a quarrel? All this country must have some owner, the gentry pushing their cravings into the wilderness, even where they never dare to venture, in their own persons, to look at the land they own. That may do in other quarters of the colony, Deerslayer, but it will not do here. Not a human being, the Lord excepted, owns a foot of soil in this part of the country. Pen was never put to paper concerning either hill or valley hereaway, as I've heard old Tom say time and again, and so he claims the best right to it of any man breathing, and what Tom claims he'll be very likely to maintain. By what I've heard you say, Hurry, this Floating Tom must be an uncommon mortal, neither Mingo, Delaware, nor Paleface. His possession, too, has been long, by your tale, and altogether beyond frontier endurance. What's the man's history and nature? Why, as to old Tom's nature, it's not much like other men's human nature, but more like a muskrat's human nature, seeing that he takes more to the ways of that animal than to the ways of any other fellow creature. Some think he was a free liver on the salt water in his youth, and a companion of a certain Kidd, who was hanged for piracy long afore you and I were born or acquainted, and that he came up into these regions thinking that the king's cruisers could never cross the mountains, and that he might enjoy the plunder peaceably in the woods. Then he was wrong, Hurry, very wrong. A man can enjoy plunder peaceably nowhere. That's much as his turn of mind may happen to be. I've known them that never could enjoy it at all, unless it was in the midst of a jollification, and them again that enjoyed it best in a corner. Some men have no peace if they don't find plunder, and some if they do. Human nature is crooked in these matters. Old Tom seems to belong to neither set, as he enjoys his. If plunder he has really got, with his daughters, in a very quiet and comfortable way, and wishes for no more. Aye, he has daughters too. I've heard the Delawares who've hunted this away tell their histories of these young women. Is there no mother, Hurry? There was once, as in reason, but she has now been dead and sunk these 2 good years. Anan, said Deerslayer, looking up at his companion in a little surprise. Dead and sunk, I say, and I hope that's good English. The old fellow lowered his wife into the lake by way of seeing the last of her, as I can testify, being an eyewitness of the ceremony. But whether Tom did it to save digging, which is no easy job among roots, or out of a conceit that the water washes away sin sooner than earth, is more than I can say. Was the poor woman uncommon wicked, that her husband should take so much pains with her body? Not unreasonable, though she had her faults. I consider Judith Hutter to have been as graceful, and about as likely to make a good end as any woman who has lived so long beyond the sound of church bells. And I can conclude old Tom sunk her as much by way of saving pains as by way of taking it. There was a little steel in her temper, it's true, and as old Hutter's pretty much flint, they struck out sparks once in a while. But, on the whole, they might be said to live amicable like. When they did kindle, the listeners got so much insights into their past lives as one gets in the darker parts of the woods, when a stray gleam of sunshine finds its way down to the roots of the trees. But Judith I shall always esteem, as it's recommended enough to one woman to be the mother of such a creature as her daughter, Judith Hutter. Judith was the name the Delawares mentioned, though it was pronounced after a fashion of their own. From their discourse, I do not think the girl would much please my fancy.
"Thy fancy!" exclaimed March, taking fire equally at the indifference and at the presumption of his companion. "What the devil have you to do with a fancy, and that, too, concerning one like Judith? You are but a boy, a sapling, that has scarce got root. Judith has had men among her suitors ever since she was 15, which is now near 5 years, and will not be apt even to cast a look upon a half-grown creature like you." "It is June, and there is not a cloud atween us and the sun, Hurry, so all this heat is not wanted," answered the other, altogether undisturbed. "Anyone may have a fancy, and a squirrel has the right to make up his mind touching a catamount." "Aye, but it might not be wise always to let the catamount know it," growled March. "But you're young and thoughtless, and I'll overlook your ignorance. Come, Deerslayer," he added, with a good-natured laugh, after pausing a moment to reflect. "Come, Deerslayer, we are sworn friends, and we will not quarrel about light-minded, jilting jade, just because she happens to be handsome, more especially as you have never seen her. Judith is only for a man whose teeth show the full marks, and it is foolish to be afeard of a boy. What did the Delaware say of the hussy? For an Indian, after all, has his notions of womankind, as well as a white man." "They said she was fair to look on, and pleasant of speech, but over given to admirers, and light-minded." "They are devils incarnate. After all, what schoolmaster is a match for an Indian in looking into nature? Some people think they are only good on a trail or the warpath, but I say they are philosophers, and understand a man as well as they understand a beaver, and a woman as well as they understand either. Now that Judith's character to a ribbon. To own the truth to you, Deerslayer, I should have married the gal 2 years since, if it had not been for two particular things, one of which is this very light-mindedness." "And what may have been the other?" demanded the hunter, who continued to eat like one that took very little interest in the subject. "The other was an uncertainty about her having me. The hussy is handsome, and she knows it. Boy, not a tree that is growing in these hills is straighter, or waves in the wind with an easier bend, nor did you ever see the doe that bounded with more natural motion. If that was all, every tongue would sound her praises, but she has such failings that I find it hard to overlook them, and sometimes I swear I'll never visit the lake again." "Which is the reason that you always come back. Nothing is ever made more sure by swearing about it."
"Ah, Deerslayer, you are a novelty in these particulars, keeping as true to education as if you never left the settlements. With me the case is different, and I never want to clinch an idea that I do not feel a wish to swear about it."
"If you knowed all that I know concerning Judith, you'd find a justification for a little cussing. Now the officers sometimes stray over to the lake, from the forts on the Mohawk, to fish and hunt, and then the creature seems beside herself. You can see in the manner which she wears her finery, and the airs she gives herself with the gallants." "That is unseemly in a poor man's daughter," returned Deerslayer gravely. "The officers are all gentry, and can only look on such as Judith with evil intentions. There's the uncertainty and the damper. I have my misgivings about a particular captain, and Jude has no one to blame but her own folly, if I am right. On the whole, I wish to look upon her as modest and becoming, and yet the clouds that drive among these hills are not more uncertain. Not a dozen white men have ever laid eyes upon her since she was a child, and yet her airs, with 2 or 3 of these officers, are extinguishers."
I would think no more of such a woman, but turn my mind altogether to the forest. That will not deceive you, being ordered and ruled by a hand that never wavers. If you know Judith, you would see how much easier it is to say this than it would be to do it. Could I bring my mind to be easy about the officers, I would carry the gal off to the Mohawk by force, make her marry me in spite of her whiffling, and leave old Tom to the care of Hetty, his other child, who, if she be not as handsome or as quick-witted as her sister, is much the most dutiful. "Is there another bird in the same nest?" asked Deerslayer, raising his eyes with a species of half-awakened curiosity. "The Delawares spoke to me of only one." "That's natural enough, when Judith Hutter and Hetty Hutter are in question. Hetty is only comely, while her sister, I tell thee, boy, is such another as not to be found atween this and the sea. Judith is as full of wit and talk and cunning as an old Indian orator, while poor Hetty is at best but compos mentis." "Anan?" inquired again the Deerslayer. "Why, what the officers call compos mentis, which I understand to signify that she means always to go in the right direction, but sometimes does not know how. Compass for the point, and mentis for the intention. No, poor Hetty is what I call on the verge of ignorance, and sometimes she stumbles on the side of the line, and sometimes on the other." "Them are beings that the Lord has in his special care," said Deerslayer, solemnly, "for he looks carefully to all who fall short of their proper share of reason. Honor and respect those who are so gifted, knowing that the evil spirit delights more to dwell in an artful body than in one that has no cunning to work upon. I'll answer for it, then, that he will not remain long with poor Hetty, for the child is just compos mentis, as I have told you. Old Tom has a feeling for the gal, and so has Judith, quick-witted and glorious as she is herself. Else would I not answer for her being altogether safe among the sort of men that sometimes meet on the lake shore." "I thought this water was an unknown and little frequented sheet," observed the Deerslayer, evidently uneasy at the idea of being too near the world. "It is all that, lad. The eyes of 20 white men never have been laid on it. Still, 20 true-bred frontiersmen, hunters and trappers and scouts and the like, can do a deal of mischief if they try. 'Twould be an awful thing to me, Deerslayer, if I did find Judith married after an absence of 6 months. Have you the gal's faith, to encourage you to hope otherwise?" "Not at all. I know not how it is. I'm a good-looking boy, that much I can see in any spring on which the sun shines, and yet I could not get the hussy to a promise, or even a cordial, willing smile, though she will laugh by the hour. If she has dared to marry in my absence, she'd be like to know the pleasures of widowhood afore she is 20. "You would not harm the man she has chosen, Hurry, simply because she found him more to her liking than yourself." "Why not? If an enemy crosses my path, will I not beat him out of it? Look at me. Am I a man like to let any sneaking, crawling skin-trader get the better of me, in a matter that touches me as near as the kindness of Judith Hutter? Besides, when we live beyond law, we must be our own judges and executioners, and if a man should be found dead in the woods, who is there to say who slew him, even admitting that the colony took the matter in hand and made a stir about it? If that man should be Judith Hutter's husband, after what has passed, I might tell enough, at least to put the colony on the trail. You, half-grown, venison-hunting bantling, you dare to think of informing against Hurry Harry in so much as a matter of touching a mink or a woodchuck?" "I would dare to speak truth, Hurry, concerning you or any man that ever lived." March looked at his companion for a moment in silent amazement. Then, seizing him by the throat with both hands, he shook his comparatively slight frame with violence that menaced the dislocation of some of the bones. Nor was this done jocularly, for anger flashed from the giant's eyes, and there were certain signs that seemed to threaten much more earnestness than the occasion would appear to call for. Whatever might be the real intention of March, and it is possible there was none settled in his mind, it is certain that he was unusually aroused. and most men who found themselves throttled by one of the mold so gigantic, in such a mood, and in a solitude so deep and helpless, would have felt intimidated, and tempted to yield even the right. Not so, however, with Deerslayer. His countenance remained unmoved, and his hand did not shake, and his answer was given in a voice that did not resort to artifice of louder tones, even by way of proving his owner's resolution. "You may shake, Hurry, until you bring down the mountain," he said quietly, "but nothing besides truth will you shake from me. It is probable that Judith Hutter has no husband to slay, and you may never have a chance to waylay one. Else would I tell her of your threat in the first conversation I held with the gal." March released his grip, and sat regarding the other in silent astonishment. "I thought we had been friends," he at length added, "but you've got the last secret of mine that will ever enter your ears." "I want none if they are to be like this. I know we live in the woods, Hurry, and are thought to be beyond human laws, and perhaps we are so, in fact, whatever it may be in right, but there is a law, and a lawmaker, that rule across the whole continent. He that flies in the face of either need not call me a friend." "Damn, Deerslayer, if I do not believe you are at heart a Moravian, and no fair-minded, plain-dealing hunter as you pretended to be." "Fair-minded or not, Hurry, you will find me as plain-dealing in deeds as I am in words. But this giving way to sudden anger is foolish, and proves how little you have sojourned with the red man. Judith Hutter, no doubt, is still single, and you spoke but as the tongue ran, and not as the heart felt. There's my hand, and we will say and think no more about it." Hurry seemed more surprised than ever. Then he burst forth in a loud, good-natured laugh, which brought tears to his eyes. After this he accepted the offered hand, and the parties became friends. "'Twould have been foolish to quarrel about an idee," March cried, as he resumed his meal, "and more like lawyers in towns than like sensible men in woods. They tell me, Deerslayer, much ill blood grows out of ideas among the people in the lower counties, and that they sometimes get to extremities upon them." "That do they, that do they. And about other matters that might better be left to take care of themselves. I have heard the Moravians say that there are lands in which men quarrel even concerning their religion, and if they can get their tempers up on such a subject, Hurry, the Lord have mercy on 'em. Howsever, there is no occasion for our following their example, and more especially about a husband that this Judith Hutter may never see, or never wish to see. For my part, I feel more curiosity about the feeble-witted sister than about your beauty. There's something that comes close to a man's feelings when he meets with a fellow creature that has all the outward show of an accountable mortal, and who fails of being what he seems, only through a lack of reason. This is bad enough in a man, but when it comes to a woman, and she a young and maybe a winning creature, it touches all the pitiful thoughts that nature has. God knows, Hurry, that such poor things be defenseless enough with all their wits about them, but it's a cruel fortune when that great protector and guide fails them. Hark, Deerslayer, you know what the hunters and trappers and peltry men in general be, and their best friends will not deny that they are headstrong and given to having their own way, without much bethinking 'em of other people's rights or feelings. And yet I don't think the man is to be found in all this region who would harm Hetty Hutter if he could. No, not even a redskin. Therein, friend Hurry, you do the Delawares, at least, and all their allied tribes, only justice. Upon a being thus struck by God's power as especially under his care. I rejoice to hear what you say, however, I rejoice to hear it. But as the sun is beginning to turn towards the afternoon sky, had we not better strike the trail again and make forward, that we may get an opportunity of seeing these wonderful sisters? Hurry March giving a cheerful assent, the remnants of the meal were soon collected. Then the travelers shouldered their packs, resumed their arms, and, quitting the little area of light, they again plunged into the deep shadows of the forest. End of Chapter 1. Recording by Josh Smith.